So I'm 47 years old, and I've been a men's coach for 18 years. I've worked with men very deeply, and sex is one of the worst topics for men out there. Not because sex is bad, not because you're bad for what you desire sexually, not because of even the potential life that you could have in terms of dating, sex, relationships, your personal relationship with your identity, but because of the amount of misinformation out there for men on sex and dating, and especially if you're in your 40s or 50s or 60s or whatever. So we're gonna start here, bad advice, and it's an overriding principle to everything we do. The bad advice of politically correct culture and the bad advice from men's self-development culture, the manosphere, the red pill, all these different things. Now, one of the things that I know from being a men's coach is so many, almost every single point of pain for a man in our culture, whether that is dating, sex, and relationships, or PTSD, or custody, addiction, depression, lack of worth, dealing with a narcissistic partner, it goes through this huge societal filter. And that societal filter basically says that men are dangerous sexually or dangerous physically, or they have a propensity towards violence. And whatever solution to whatever problem they're having, whether they're a victim or not, or they have a part to play in it, the culture is always giving an answer that's basically saying, be careful, don't be like the bad. We're gonna talk to you about this issue of sex or dating or addiction or whatever, but just make sure you don't become a bad man. So what's interesting about this perspective, I call it the PC perspective. So the people who are sharing this PC narrative don't really have much experience with male pain, the reality of male pain, why it exists, or any solution in getting that male pain to a long-term solution. For a little bit, it might be a solution which is like feel good, open your heart, communicate well, be authentic, all these different things. And these things sound good, they make you feel good, they kind of are true for a little bit, but for the many different problems in all those different categories, whether it's PTSD, addiction, trauma, abuse, but in this case, sex, dating, and relationships, it's gonna give you stuff that doesn't work. Be authentic, talk to people, be nice, be a strong, debonair, powerful man, but don't be too much. And let's give you a bunch of fake examples or archetypes of what that's supposed to look like. Let's have you look at George Clooney or Hugh Jackman or whatever it is. And man, like, they're great guys to model off of, but they're not real. And we know very little about their lives. Let alone the guy that really tries these things of just being good and being nice and respectful. It doesn't really leave a place for, let's say, if there is some sort of desires that don't fit in with that, he feels out of place, keeps it a secret, doesn't tell anybody, is afraid to tell anybody, and if he doesn't abide by that, they're canceled. Which gets me to the other terrible thing about PC culture, which is literally in every single one of men's trauma highlight points, topics that I deal with on an every single day basis, is that if you don't do the PC solution, the consequence is that you are a bad man, a toxic man, a man that is enslaved by the patriarchy that hurts women, and your sexual desires, your desires to date, because you have these things that may not fit in with PC culture, you must be violent. You must be evil. And no man really wants that, so keeps it a secret and kind of like I said, creates bigger problems, repression. And if there is a serious problem, something like trauma or abuse or being bombarded by social media or a narcissistic partner or whatever that makes a man want to act out in some way that isn't politically correct, there's no way for him to talk about it, and he's afraid to talk about it. This is crazy. So many men who are seeking a good relationship with women to fulfill their sex and sexuality are forced into boxes of repression where they can't talk about a very real problem. They have to seek the underbelly, and then we have things like the other false solution, which is the manosphere. Now, it's kind of the same thing when it gets to most men's dating advice and male stuff, manosphere stuff, red pill stuff, Andrew Tate stuff. When you have a culture of disempowered men, men who don't have any place to go, men who have a force of nature and an urge within them, whether that has to do with any of the topics I talked about, and there's no place to go, you have an immense amount of frustrated men who are willing to believe in anything. They have some violent tendencies, which are normal and natural. Of course, don't go out and hurt people, but first off, when we have a culture that represses all of that and you have all the stress you have, that's going to happen. You need to learn how to deal with it. and you can turn it into something good. Or you have thoughts about sexuality that are tempting, that are biological, which every single man has. He's going to be overwhelmed by his sex, and he's expected to control it without any real guidance because you're not allowed to talk about these things. Well, guess what? You're going to have a huge population of guys that are pissed off and want the opposite of that. If PC culture is telling me that I can't be this and I have this problem and I'm overwhelmed by it, somebody who doesn't have that much experience with coaching men, sounds charismatic, gives some examples of why it should work or archetypes of why it should work, man, everybody's going to buy that. Every single man is going to buy that. So the problem is it has the same problem as the PC solution. It doesn't really work. And although power, money, sex, status, feeling on top of the world, having as many women as possible, even though most of the people who are promoting this message don't have any of those things. They're just telling you it sounds good because it sounds good to them, and they may have made it work once or twice, but there's no sustained period of time where this has worked for them. Those things all sound good, but they're not gonna fulfill what you're missing. I kind of want to add a caveat to this because they're not going to fulfill what you're missing, but that doesn't mean that the PC culture is right either. This idea of being authentic and fulfill this thing inside of you. Man, who's showing men those things? Nobody's showing men those things. Actually, I'll take that back because there are a few coaches which are really good that can guide you through this, especially when it comes to sex and dating. You know, I'm a big fan of David Tien. He's been doing this just as long as me. He's actually an academic, which I am not, but he's an amazing guy and a great coach. And we have tons of crossover clients that I see his work do well. I've also been doing this in nonstop since 2006. And bottom line is, sex is so important. I hate the fact that when I talk about it, when I put up a video on it, it is repressed by social media because I'm not a female sharing a PC sex, pro-sex, whatever message. It gets repressed and her stuff gets boosted by every single algorithm because I'm not a man that doesn't have the man bun that does a bunch of spiritual warrior BS. And by the way, as we'll talk about, all that spiritual warrior image stuff that people are seeking, man, this is stuff that I do on a day-to-day basis. And I'll tell you this, I see none of those guys in the things I do. Spirituality and these different modalities that are sold over and over again in our culture, the people that really do them don't really brag about them or do them for some sort of social popularity contest. But here's the thing, when I talk about this, it doesn't get listened to. It gets suppressed by Google, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and so on. And I get it, I could make flawed videos or content or whatever, but here is the bare bones reality and truth. I do not know many people who've been coaching men for 18 years, working with men on intimate topics over and over again, nonstop, with as much experience that I have, able to gain any algorithmic favor on this. What I see are the pop culture manosphere dudes basically talking about stuff that in concept sounds good to a starved male culture or a broken PC culture giving bad advice to men. And although in all of those categories, some of that advice is good, it's just incomplete. And what men need, what men and women need in our culture, in the huge amounts of problems and issues that we have, they need somebody who can help them from start to finish. So their problem being stopped, solved, and addressed, I guarantee you the opposite of that problem, which is more women or money or whatever people think it is not the answer. They need to not just get out of pain, but solve the overall thing to it so that they can live happy and whole lives. And this takes a long time. I don't get why other coaches, who there's just a ton of them and kind of always has, don't offer a service that completes any sort of male journey. I mean, man, there's a lot I could say about this. We look at all of the rite of passage BS that we see with men, and they go for a weekend and take a sledgehammer to a tire and wrestle once or twice, I don't know, shoot a gun, go into a sweat lodge, and then all of a sudden they have this feeling. Yeah, I get it, that feels good. But we don't gain masculinity, fortitude, rites of passage, cultural depth and why people did things from going into a sweat lodge once or twice, or an ice bath, or getting in a staged fight while doing breath work and crying to understand the depth of why that culture believed in that, did it, and so on. All right, so we have a problem in our culture. There's a bunch of false solutions. Men have a natural drive towards sex and sexuality, and there's basically nobody really answering these questions. In fact, they're giving answers to those questions that create more problems that make things much worse. And the end result is there's still a man with a massive sex drive being told it's wrong with no answers to fulfillment, and he either gets to rebel further, be more angry, be desperate and search for whatever BS solutions, or conform to a way of life that isn't going to make him happy. The guy is going to be frustrated, angry, without solutions. Let me put this earpiece away that I had hidden from the other angle. That was my teleprompter. So I'm 47, and since 28, I've been able to live a sex life that is awesome. And I'm not saying this to brag, because it has a lot of pain in it. It has a lot of dysfunction in it, you could say, a lot of relationships that I don't want to disrespect talking about them, because they were so great with amazing women that didn't work out for whatever reasons. Now, during this whole time, I was teaching dating and seduction stuff throughout it, which again, is I've been talking about, is fairly unpopular and people don't like to talk about it. But it's a fundamental need of men. So much to the point where I didn't advertise it for probably the last 6 years. And I have a constant influx of people asking me about these things, meaning that I don't have any billboard by it, but they go and watch a video that I made from years and years and years ago, and then they find some email address and they email me for help. A lot of the different things that have to do with dating and sex are pretty expensive. They're not cheap. And in fact, my highest tier program is the one you want if you're really serious about that, and that is the highest tier program. I am still in business from this. The sad thing about all of this is most of those guys have hired a bunch of other people and they've spent 20 grand on guaranteed solutions. They get a solution of what they think is the solution to their problem, which is being able to approach or talk to women or get laid a couple times, but they still can't have a relationship. They don't feel fulfilled. They don't understand why they have dysfunctional relationships or sexual issues, which are huge things. They're massive things in our culture. In fact, I would say that every single man and woman has issues around sex and sexuality due to cultural repression, overselling of it, tons and tons of misinformation on both sides, and all the stuff that I've been ranting about for the last X amount of minutes, which you're probably sick of hearing about. Now, sex has been one of my greatest teachers, hands down, easily. Like I said, there were many issues that I've had or have, and you have to be able to be in relationships and sexually active to work them out. That doesn't mean that you have to have relationships like me or a ton of them or a few of them, but you need to have them. Your sexual expression and the actions of connection within that are necessary for you to gain experience in what is going to help you resolve these things. That doesn't mean that you won't need therapy. You probably will. That doesn't mean that you don't inventory yourself. You absolutely need to. If you're working with me, you will. And it definitely does not mean that there's a quick fix to any of this, meaning that there is a whole bunch of it. One, sex is natural. Like having a job or making money is not natural. Driving a car is not natural. Reading a book is not natural. Well, whatever, we could argue about these things, but in our evolution, in order for us to be happy, for us to be fulfilled, and all the different things that were needed in that, we didn't have to read. We didn't have to drive a car. We didn't have to keep a schedule even. What we had to do was have forces of empathy work within us and connect, and forces of sexual drivers that I call seduction work within us and be fulfilled. And if we didn't have them, it would dramatically affect the way we felt. It would touch something within our survival systems that set off an alarm. There's a ton of stuff that I say about evolutionary psychology and biology that I think many people get wrong, but look, sex is a part of that. Social connection is a part of that. And it is necessary for you to be at a baseline of what we'll call health, meaning your body, mind, whatever is going to be functioning in its right way. It is necessary to be fulfilled to some degree in order for those things to work. If not, there's something that doesn't work. And as I pointed out, we have two big things in our culture, PC culture and men's advice that's giving bad advice on this that won't work to fulfill those natural drivers. Now, the other thing is this video is somewhat of a Steve sitting on a log talking video. It's a long video where I'm going through all sorts of different ideas and theories and talking about my experience coaching. Part of the reason why I'm making it is because I am going to start making more content videos based on sex, seduction, dating, international living, all these different things that I've stayed away from in the last couple of years because I've gained a lot of popularity through divorce and custody. But as always, literally half of my business, and actually the part of my business that makes the most money is dealing with stuff outside of divorce and custody. Usually meaning that if a guy stays working with me and comes through the divorce and custody funnel, they're going to switch to something that has to do with male trauma and all these other things that I'm very good at in coaching people with. And one thing to keep in mind here, when we get into male trauma and we get into these consistent problems that our culture has, let's look at which one of those things are from our nature. So I'll checklist a few off. I'm probably going to miss some, but depression, general unhappiness, overwork, lack of worth, PTSD from addiction, war, poor health, poor mental health. Did I say custody, divorce, sex issues, sexual abuse, whatever abuse? All these things have that same problem of being put through that filter of BS culture, false narratives to men, and false solutions, making them more pissed off. The ones that are of our nature are going to be mental health, physical health, sex, and socializing. I need you to understand how important this is for you to be social and sexual, to have parts of you functioning. I get it. We live in a crazy culture where I can go on ChatGPT and YouTube and whatever, all these things outside of my nature, which are part of my daily routine, which make me feel good and complete, but I still have to have a baseline of seduction and empathy in order to have certain things alleviated in my culture and not move into neurosis. When we get into other things that men have, like abuse or problems with pornography or problems with addiction or whatever, in a culture that has everything sexual, like selling you on everything, well, you are repressed. Guess what? Your natural sexual drivers are going to be way out of, they're going to be crazy. So it's kind of interesting if we go, well, in our evolution, we did this, and then we make up a bunch of stories about what tribes were like. I always think this is interesting when it comes to paleo people and even academics around evolutionary psychology and biology. Very few of them have lived. Well, I don't want to say very few, maybe many of them, but the people that are loudest promoting a message have lived or been with any indigenous groups or something which is more primitive living, and they make these idiotic assumptions about what it means to be primal. Well, in this culture, they had relationships this way, so that's the natural way. Or in this culture, they did this. The guy that wrote Sex at Dawn cannot be believed because we've disproven X, Y, and Z, which is a very good book. It does lean on stuff which is much more openness towards sex. But again, there's so many different ways. Now, I'll tell you this, I do live with an indigenous group. They do have some sort of contacts. I mean, they contacted me. There's no electricity. They're living the same way they lived before Columbus hit in the Spanish-occupied South America. They have their own language. There's a lot of things that are still traditional. Actually, there's a ton which is traditional about them. They are very different in terms of sex and relationships, but one of the most heartbreaking things that I see whenever I spend time with them that I have to decompress from, and I often, well, I don't write about it publicly, but I journal about it, write to my friends about it, is one of the saddest things is to see what people are like when they're with people that care about them all the time. When I explain the problems that we have in our culture, which is very difficult because we communicate through Spanish, which I'm not that great at, and they are not that great at, they cannot understand why people in our culture would do the things that they do for sexual validation or fun or just feeling a part of or whole or whatever it is. It's crazy, but they're one culture and they're not super sexual, at least from what I can see, and what they've shown me and what they've allowed me to document and all these different things. So when it comes to our culture, men and women have complete distortions about sex and sexuality and don't have outlets to work through them. What we think is going to make us happy is going to be all sorts of intense things of over-exaggerated dating and experiences and so on. You could almost say that in order for somebody to achieve sexual health in our culture, at least one way, not every single way, and I get that there are different options for this, a man is going to run into certain problems, and a woman will too. This will be an over-exaggeration about sex and dating. This will be an obsession with different experiences. It could be the idea or perspective of family or not understanding love. And these things all fit back to natural drivers. Those natural drivers are going to be like, I want to connect. I want to have sex, I have a drive for it. Now it's important to understand, and I bring this up quite a bit, is evolution is not a design, it just had to work. So a fly is not only millions of years more evolved than me, but it has more cycles of life that it had to make mistakes and so on. So it's way more evolved than a human being, sharks, whatever. So because of that, because in my evolution I got thoughts and whatever else, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's more perfect. It's more perfect that it didn't make me die. So evolution and getting close to that is a baseline for an assumption of functionality. It doesn't mean it's the best. But if we are outside of that evolution, more than likely, not guaranteed, because again, this isn't necessary for it, there could be a flaw associated with that. So we have to look at what would be the evolutionary traits that move into sex and seduction. What do we need? Well, before all of this, we need to socialize. We need empathy to be fulfilled. We need to have friendships and connections and so on. Our social filter basically says we need to do this and be super cool and have all this sort of stuff. So that's going to be our first inclination for it. If our first inclination is to go and be popular and cool, we're probably going to run into some problems from that. So there's going to be a consistency of men and women in our modern culture that have built up the baggage from trying to be cool and having it not working, or being cool, having it work and coming up with other problems because of that. So maybe some examples of that might be like, I got really famous, or I did this, or I thought that these were these ways. I ended up getting sued or caught up in the wrong crowd, or I became even more famous and think I'm more arrogant or whatever. So we have different issues that are going to be problems to us in our world. What's interesting about this is, although our social construct and culture is, it's a byproduct of evolution, but it's not necessary for what we need to fulfill these things that I'm talking about us being in deficit with. This thing about those things causing problems, like let's say arrogance or confidence, they don't necessarily need to be bad. I personally do think they're bad, but I'm just saying that they're not necessary to fulfill or get in the way of fulfillment of certain natural drivers. Maybe they are, whatever, but it's culturally dependent. This is where it's interesting, because philosophy and religion, all these different human-made things, are really obsessed with how do we deal with this? How do we find happiness in this world? This is another different rabbit hole, and it's kind of like a big part of the book that I was writing, and it's one of the more problematic things. This is that virtue, wisdom, things that humanity builds are some of the most important things, but they don't really have any value to our nature, to our past evolutionary processes. It might influence something else, but the nature, the universe, the physical world, maybe the universe has a little bit more of a play in it, who knows? But from what we know now, a freeway has the same exact value as a philosophy to nature, to the world. So to my natural sexual urge being fulfilled, a freeway has the same worth as a religion, so to speak. It really doesn't have a worth. But where that religion could be helpful is that religion could help bring satisfaction to sexuality or relationships or empathy and so on. Man, I am just going off on tangents. But this goes into a TSL philosophy, which is one of the courses that I have where we built all these different philosophies on it, which is nature does not need science to understand itself, but man needs science to understand it. This isn't that science is wrong or whatever. It's just that the natural world does not need it at all. Humanity needs it in order to understand it and to be a bigger part of it. It's kind of a big deal. So I also want to make this clear. When I was 21, wouldn't it be great if I said when I was 16? But when I was, let's say 21, I read the book Ishmael and became obsessed with it. And a lot of the idea of that isn't just the levers and takers, it's that, man versus nature or whatever. Read the book, just read the book. I went on to interview Daniel Quinn. We became kind of friends, and actually he messaged me when YouTube first came out, and he said, Steve, all these interviews you're doing, you should put them on this thing called YouTube, back when you could only do like 2-minute videos or something like that. When I started as a dating coach, these were huge in my mind. So it was very important for me that every single social dynamics theory had to fit within that. Now, don't get me wrong, I wanted to get laid. I came from this oversexed idea of what friendships and socializing was supposed to do to make you happy, as well as sex and what was supposed to make you happy. I went for it and I got it. Like, that's one of the other things with me that I'll say about dating and sex is I was able to really do everything I wanted. And the happiness and fulfillment of socializing, dating, and sex was very, very different than getting what I wanted. But that also doesn't mean that getting what I wanted was bad. Getting what I wanted was good. And one of the things that I got from all of this is that almost any form of socializing, any form of sex can be good. It can also be bad. And when I just saw this right in front of me, that you could be an oversexed person or date a lot of people or have all sorts of crazy sex, or let's say you went through whatever traumatic events and are reliving that through sex and sexuality. Of course, sex is crazy. You go into a different mindset, a different way of thinking, you have different traits of your personality that come out, all these different things. It can be totally dangerous, but that doesn't mean that the act was dangerous. That does not mean that the sex act was bad. It meant that there was something about how we lived that made us want to do that, like certain parts of it, find tremendous enjoyment and perspective on it, that also mixed with our cultural blueprint, who we were, what we walked in with, the baggage, all that sort of stuff that helped motivate us towards it, and how to process it that made it bad. But if we could change those things, like work on the reasons why we were motivated towards it, work on why we liked it, what we didn't like, all the different confusion of that, which is really hard to articulate, especially in sex, less so with empathy. Empathy can be confusing, but we can remain much more logical around it. But sex and seduction, our brains completely change and they're hard to remember. If you ever want to look at this, there's a book called Biology of Desire, and it has to do with addiction and generally drug addiction. But when it's talking about there in the postfrontal cortex and how our mind kind of gets triggered into acts of addiction and impulsivity and whatnot, well, sex works kind of the same way. There's too many jumps of like sex and cocaine they're not the same, okay? But there can be aspects of how our postfrontal cortex interacts with situations, who we are, our identity, that has very much to do. It breaks it down really, really well. Needless to say, one of the points of that book, although me as a 12-step person, it kind of hates on the 12 steps, but I think it gets it wrong or whatever. Conversation for another day, but I'll probably have it. In fact, I gave a 21 convention speech based on it. It's basically saying that these things are natural drivers, that the idea of having our identity work with these impulsive acts and so on are part of our nature and shouldn't be seen as something bad or evil or whatever. So basically, the thing here is that we have this distortion about what is going to make us happy socially and sexually, and we go for it. That gives us problems, baggage, and also all sorts of different things. Most men and women are just walking in with, they're going to have some of that, and some of it can be really extreme. So like pornography could be one of those things, and you just go crazy with it, and then you can't get hard or whatever. Here's one of just the fundamental theories with that, and it takes a lot of work, and you have to work at it, and you probably need a coach with it, which is why I coach people. But hating porn, disliking it, watching a bunch of material on it, there's benefit towards maybe building or building more power in the breaking of your relationship with it and so on, and realizing that there's a whole bunch of BS in it. But your answer isn't going to be in the hate and judgment that you have for pornography. The answer is going to be always into how you have healthy sex and having the stuff that your body and your nature, your brain, all of your physiology, your hormones were driven to do. You were born to be sexual, a huge thing. You were born to be social, you were born to be sexual, huge thing within my philosophies, right? So that is going to fix it. So if I have a distortion culturally that comes from sex that makes me like all sorts of weird, crazy stuff that our culture says is bad or violent or evil or whatever, I can still find fulfillment. And again, I don't want to promote having actions that hurt or harm people, but I can still have fulfillment if I get into what is the nature of my sex. What is it that allows me to be fulfilled and complete sexually so that my nature triggers off and my brain can start having fulfillment in that? Now, stopping certain actions that cause harm or get you carried away or screw you up or basically possess you with some insane manic state of sexuality or empathy or whatever it is, yeah, you probably should stop those things. But in theory, and something that we've proven in some cases over and over again within my groups, when it comes to human psychology around this stuff, you can't really study it. So there's only weirdos like me that are coaches where it's like, hey, you want to have sex with tons of different people and you have this problem? Well, let's go for it. And let's try and connect the different dots of what's actually happening. In theory, you could still do the poor behavior while getting good, fulfilling behavior. Now, there's all sorts of varying degrees of that, of how much of each. I'm going to say this, when it comes to addiction, clean cuts are usually really, really good. But with some addictions that have to do with sex or eating or risk taking, we can't always do that. Drugs, easy, man. Stop, start the new way of life. And by all means, as somebody who is in recovery from drug addiction for many, many years, it ain't easy. But my heart goes out to those people with food and different addictions that you have to do daily in order to survive. So look, I'm going to wrap up this video, but basically sex, relationships, empathy, being social are all screwed up for both men and women in our culture. And what I want to do is start putting out different material. In fact, I'm going to record a video right now on older men dating younger women. And not saying that you have to do that, not saying that this is, the way a man's going to feel power or anything like that, but this is a natural urge that many people have. You can fulfill it, see if you like it, and there's going to be a whole bunch of problems that come with it. But also, you can be an older man and date older women. You could be a young man and date older women. Men especially need information out there on dating, sex, and relationships. They need to, they can find some benefit from watching whoever, in the Red Pill or Manosphere that's super famous. They can find benefit of gaining status and money and power and whatever, and having power over women as their answer to their assumed evolutionary trait of masculinity that people are making up. They can get all those things. All those things feel good, and all of those things are within our evolution, but they are not the only way. And if we assume they are, it gets all screwed up. You can also watch The Authentic Dude and talk about meditation and whatever, and how it cultivated his no-fap testosterone boost, or whatever it is. But here's what I think. I think you should go out. You should be able to have the experiences that you want. You should do it ethically without harming people. You should understand that there's going to be processes in this where you're going to make huge mistakes and people are going to get hurt and you're going to get hurt, and ways to work through them. I fundamentally want you to get the true result of your natural drivers being fulfilled for empathy, that's being social, and sex. And that is learning how to date, have sex, have relationships. And if you can do those things, you're going to open up a huge window to who you are as a man. You're going to see what is cultural and not true. You're going to see what is the answer. And then you're going to go, well, here's the world where I have to do both. And you're going to be able to mix them. And for 18 years, this is what I've seen people do over and over again. It's also what I have done. And in my 47 years of life, man, I've had an awesome and amazing sexual life. And man, I'm sad people don't think that's possible for them. I think we're good there. All right. Ciao. Oh, man. If you didn't know this, Steve Maeda can talk a lot.